Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I'm back again with another video. This time I'm going to be discussing a topic that I found pretty interesting and I liked looking up and looking into. And it's not too statistic heavy whatsoever. It's just kind of my opinion on some stuff, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you find it interesting. It's basically like finals matchups that would have been really cool to see, but never happened, but were somewhat close to happening, and people were like kind of talking about them at the time. So that was like a really long explanation for what it is. It's basically finals matchups we never got to see but wanted to. Um, okay, so basically going into it, the parameters of this are like these two teams were both really good contenders during the same time period, and it was like a high chance that they would possibly face each other in the finals, and people were somewhat looking forward to that idea and thought that it would be cool to see them square off, but they never did face each other in the finals. But people always said like, man, that would have been a cool matchup to have seen them go toe to toe. So those are basically the parameters. The teams I'm going with are pretty recent. Like the latest team I have in here is in the 80s. So if you're expecting me to pull out some sort of thing like um, San Diego Rockets and New York Knicks, you're going to be kind of disappointed because I don't have anything from the 70s or anything like that. So all that being said, let's get into it. The first team I have on here, or the first matchup I have on here, is San Antonio Spurs and Boston Celtics. To clarify, this is the window for these teams between like 2007 to 13. That's kind of the window we're looking at there. To review, the Spurs made the finals in 2007, the year before the Celtics formed the Big Three. So they were obviously like a really good team around that time, and that was unfortunate that was just that year and not a year later, because then they would have faced the Celtics in the finals instead of the Lakers. As many people know, the Celtics formed a Big Three in 2008, acquiring Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett, and then they also saw the rise of point guard Rajon Rondo as a perennial All-Star. So they basically had four All-Stars on their team at any given year between that 2007 to 2013 time frame. Um, of course, Ray Allen left in 2012, so he wasn't there for that last year. But basically, they were a four All-Star team, kind of a juggernaut in the East for a bit, or like one of the big like title contenders. And then the West, the Spurs kind of always have been a contender. They got at this time Duncan, and then they had Ginobili and Parker. And for some of this stretch, they had Bruce Bowen, and then for some of it, they kind of just did it by committee at the small forward spot. And then at center, they never really had a great option. You know, Tim Duncan started at center sometimes, sometimes at power forward. It kind of depended, but they always had those really solid three guys for sure, and they were always a title contender. As I say, they got to the finals in '07, lost in the conference finals in '08, so we were close then to seeing a finals matchup. And then 2009, 10, and 11, I think they lost in the first round every year in there. 2012, the Spurs got to the conference finals, and the Celtics got to the conference finals, so we were pretty close that year. And then 2013, the Spurs got to the finals, and then the Celtics lost in the first round. So, oh yeah, and then the Celtics got to the finals and won in 2008. 2009, they lost in the second round because Garnett was injured. 2010, they got to the finals against the Lakers and lost. 2011, they lost in the second round. 2012, they lost in the conference finals, and then 2013, they lost in the first round. So the years that we were closest to seeing this as a matchup were 2012 when they each got to the conference finals and lost, and then 2008 when the Spurs got to the conference finals and lost, and the Celtics got to the finals and won. So those are the 2 years that we probably would have most likely seen it. Um, why would this would have been a good matchup? You had good matchups like Tony Parker going up against Rajon Rondo, Manu Ginobili heading up against Ray Allen, Bruce Bowen guarding Paul Pierce in the 2008 one before he had retired, and then of course Garnett and Tim Duncan going at it, both still at the peak of their powers, or at least in maybe in the second half of their primes, but still prime players. And then 2012, you would have still had Tony Parker as like the best player on the Spurs. You still would have had the Garnett Duncan matchup. Still would have had the Ginobili Ray Allen matchup. And then you would have had a rookie Kawhi guarding Paul Pierce. So you still would have had all those really cool matchups to watch. Basically, both teams pretty defensive oriented, so you would have gotten to see two teams that execute really well on that end of the ball operate. And then also, I think just the main thing with this matchup, though, that I keep harkening back to is the Garnett versus Duncan thing. Because for so many years in the Western Conference, the conversation was who's the best between Duncan, Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki. And I feel like Duncan and Garnett had more of the rivalry than either of the two had with Nowitzki. So it would have been cool to see those two who were kind of seen as contemporaries and rivals for so long go at it in the finals. Unfortunately, we never got that matchup. They're also complete opposites in that Tim Duncan is super quiet and Kevin Garnett is super loud and rowdy and a big trash talker. Moving on from that, the next matchup I have on here is the 2005 Suns versus the 2005 Pistons in the finals. Now you could say 2006 Suns versus Pistons as well, or even 2007. But 2005 I think is when each was really at their best. So in real life, the Spurs beat the Pistons in 7 games in the finals to win, but the Suns actually had the best record in the NBA that season at 62 wins. They were they were expected to beat the Spurs, I'd actually say, in the Western Conference Finals, but they lost because of just execution being poor and the Spurs basically out coaching the Suns a bit, and the Suns kind of coming up short in the clutch. But you would have seen a real. This is probably the least like talked about of any of these. This is the one that's probably the most like my opinion instead of like things like I've watched people or I've heard people talk about some of these other ones. Like I've heard, well, as I go down the list, you'll have probably heard a couple of them are common ones. But this one is the one that I feel like is the most unique to what I think, where I've never heard anyone else talk about this. Suns and Pistons, you saw the Pistons are the ultimate identity of defense in a team. Ben Wallace, a huge defender, great 3 or 4-time defensive player of the year guy, and Billups, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, all good defenders as well. They were like the #1 defense in the league for a couple of years. And then on the other side, you had the Suns, who were the complete opposite. The we're all offense all the time. If we're going to beat you, it's by scoring 120 points or more per game. I think it would have been really cool to see like what ultimately is better, the best offense in the league or the best defense in the league. So that would have been a cool matchup to see, but ultimately we didn't get it. You would have had cool matchups like Billups versus Nash, Joe Johnson versus Rip Hamilton. You would have had Amari Stoudemire versus Ben Wallace, Sean Marion versus Rasheed Wallace. So you would have had a lot of cool matchups. And then Quentin Richardson, I guess, versus Tayshaun Prince. That's not really one of the marquee ones. But those other four would have been pretty cool to see how those guys would have gone up against each other. Okay, so moving on from that to the next one. Also, these are in no particular order, by the way. I just like came up with this list. It's not like the last one is going to be the best one. I just put them down in a random order. Okay, so the next one I have on here is the 2008 to 10 Lakers versus the 2008 to 10 Cavaliers, or actually for that matter, 2007 to 10. So the Lakers, excuse me, made the finals in 2008, 9, and 10, winning the latter two in 9 and 10. And the Cavaliers made the finals in 07, and then in 08 they lost in the second round. 09 they lost in the conference finals. And then in 2010 they lost in the second round. But okay, so really, obviously not 2007 because the Lakers didn't have Pau Gasol yet and weren't really a powerhouse yet when the Cavs made the finals that year. But then 08, people were saying, oh, maybe the Cavs can repeat as conference champs and face probably the Lakers. That didn't happen as the Celtics were a far better team than the Cavs at that point. Then 09, Garnett was injured and the Lakers were clearly the best team in the league at 65 wins. The Cavs, well, no, they had 65 and the Cavs had 66 wins that year, so the Cavs were the best team. So most people thought the Cavs would make the finals and play the Lakers, and you'd get the Kobe in his prime versus LeBron in his prime matchup. But we didn't get that because the Cavs lost to the Magic in the conference finals, disappointingly, most would agree. But really, the Cavs just lacked anybody outside of LeBron. And then they had Mo Williams, who was an all-star that year, but still, Orlando was just a lot more deep than them, and they didn't have any answer for Dwight Howard, so they didn't make it. Next year, Cavs led the East again with 61 wins. Lakers led the West with 58 wins, and then they face off. People thought, okay, now this is the year. Cavs have bulked up a bit. They got Shaq on the team. They got Antoine Jameson. They still got Mo Williams. They're primed and ready to go to the finals and square off with the Lakers, who have now acquired Ron Artest to bulk up their team and improve a little bit. But once again, we were robbed of that finals matchup, the prime Kobe versus prime LeBron, because the Celtics uh, pulled off the upset and beat the Cavaliers in the second round. Shaquille O'Neal was highly underwhelming. Same with Antoine Jameson, didn't really play up to expectations. Mo Williams played about what people expected, but still, it's Mo Williams. It's not like he's a Hall of Famer. He's a one-time All-Star. And then you have LeBron, who played good, but was a little bit underwhelming at the same time. And the Celtics basically were just on their game, and everyone played up to their highest potential for that matchup in that series, and so they beat the Cavaliers. So ultimately, in those 3 years, we never got the Cavaliers Lakers that we always wanted to see, prime LeBron versus prime Kobe. Sadly, we were robbed of that matchup. Next on here, I have the 90s Bulls versus the 90s Rockets. So if you don't know, the Rockets won the title in 94 and 95, and those were the 2 years in between the Bulls' three-peat, so they were sort of seen as the two teams of the 90s. But we never got to see these two titans of the 90s square off in the finals. Our best chance was probably to see them in 95 during the Rockets' second title win. The Bulls got to the second round and lost. So that was probably our best chance. Or let me see here. Another one would have been 92 to 93. The Rockets were the second seed in the West, but then they lost in the second round to the Sonics. So that was probably one of our other best chances. So those 2 years, and then probably the best chance though was in the 97 playoffs. The Bulls got to the finals and beat the Jazz, but the Rockets had acquired. This was when they had as their big three Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, and Charles Barkley. They got to the conference finals against the Jazz and lost in 6 games. So they were 2 games away from facing the Bulls in the finals, and so we were close. That was the closest year where we were the closest we would have ever been, because the Rockets were literally 2 wins away from making it to the finals and facing off against the Bulls. You would have gotten to see some cool matchups, like we already saw Clyde Drexler against Jordan in 92, but we would have gotten to see that again, and then we would have gotten to see Dennis Rodman go up against Charles Barkley, and then we would have had to see how the Bulls handled Hakeem Olajuwon, and how the Rockets made up for not really having a great wing defender to take on Scottie Pippen if they were to put Clyde Drexler on Michael Jordan. So it would have been really interesting. And the Rockets, like Kenny Smith and Hakeem, would say that if they would have faced the Bulls, they would have won. That's what they always say, because they say, well, they wouldn't have had any answer for Hakeem. It's not like Dennis Rodman could guard him. So there's been some trash talk, and then a lot of people obviously say that the Bulls would have had 8 straight titles if it weren't for Michael Jordan retiring. So it's a matchup that people kind of have wanted to see for a long while, and see how those teams would stack up against each other. Next on the list, I have the Miami Heat versus the Golden State Warriors. Now, this is sort of one where it could have almost happened, but it didn't. The window for this would have been like 2013 to 15 or 2012 to 15. So 2012, in the 2013 playoffs, the Heat won the championship, obviously, versus the Spurs. The Warriors lost in the second round, but they were a team that people could have seen somehow getting farther than they did. The 2014 season, the Heat got to the finals and lost, and then the Golden State Warriors lost in the first round, but they were a 50-plus win team, so people were like, hey, maybe they'll get kind of farther this year, considering the year before they only had 47 wins, and they nearly got to the conference finals. But this year they lost in the first round because the Clippers were just really on their game. And then, obviously, the next year the Heat broke up, and so that prevented them from going far in the playoffs. But then the Warriors had then that year made that jump to be an NBA Finals contender. But if the Heat would have just stayed together for one more season, they likely would have made the finals, and then the Warriors made that jump that season, so we would have gotten to see Heat versus Warriors. I can't say too much about this one because there really wasn't a chance for it to happen realistically, but if the Heat would have just stayed together one more year, we would have seen it. You would have had matchups like Klay Thompson versus Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh versus Draymond Green. You probably would have had LeBron guarding Steph Curry, honestly, I would imagine. So that would have been interesting. And you would have basically just see the changing of the guard in the NBA, as the Heat would have been basically on their way out, as they basically ushered in the Warriors on their way in. That would have been a really interesting matchup. I think it would have been a toss up for who would have won. I probably would have picked the Warriors, but with LeBron, he won 6 games on those Warriors, or he won 2 games in the finals against those Warriors with Dellavedova as the second best player. So if he had Bosh and Wade, could he have done a bit better? Probably. And so maybe would he have won that series? Possibly. We don't really know. Okay, moving on. The next one I have is the Chicago Bulls versus the Los Angeles Lakers during Showtime. Now, the Bulls and Lakers did face off in the 91 finals, but this was when they didn't have Kareem anymore, and like Byron Scott and James Worthy were their second and third best players. Well, James Worthy was their second best player, and Byron Scott their third best player. Magic was still MVP this season, but he was a little bit worse. It'd be like think of like LeBron now versus LeBron in like 2013. You'd probably think of 2013 LeBron as a better version, even though this year's LeBron is still good. Or it'd be the difference of like the LeBron getting to the finals last year. It's obviously a different team versus when he got to the finals in say like 2014 or 15, when they had Love and Kyrie. Yeah, that's probably the best matchup I can think of. Think of when LeBron got to the finals in 2016 and you had a healthy Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving versus 2018 where you didn't have any Kyrie Irving. That's sort of like the Lakers making it in like 87, 88 versus them making it in 91 with no Kareem. So you got that finals matchup. The Bulls won that one, but you had Vlade Divac starting at center, and AC Green was well past his prime at that point. And you didn't have much off the bench for the Lakers, so it wasn't Showtime. But let's say we would have seen it in the Lakers did make the finals in '89. They still had Kareem. It was his last season. If the Bulls would have beaten the Pistons in the conference finals that year, we would have gotten Showtime Lakers versus Bulls. The year after that, the Lakers didn't do all that well. I think they lost a little bit earlier on in the playoffs, in the 89 to 90 season, because that year the Blazers made the finals versus the Pistons. But so I don't think that we can really count that year. And this one's kind of a cheap one because technically we did get Lakers versus Bulls like 2 years later. But I think that it would have been a lot more interesting to have seen the Showtime Lakers versus the Bulls at the height of their powers. We just missed it by about 2 or 3 years. Again, the best year would have probably been the 1989 finals. The Lakers got there and lost, and versus the Pistons, and then the Bulls lost to the Pistons in 6 games in the conference finals. But that was our best chance to see Jordan and Magic go up against each other with Kareem and Scottie and James Worthy and Horace Grant all involved as well. And just Showtime Lakers, not just generic Lakers with Magic, but Showtime, because there's a big difference between how the team was run. Pat Riley was the head coach versus I think I can't remember who was the head coach after him, but there was just a notable difference, if you know what I'm talking about. Next one, and the last one I have on here, which I think would be an interesting one that we never saw, was the Miami Heat versus the Los Angeles Lakers, the time frame between 2010 and 2013. So as I mentioned earlier, the LeBron-Kobe matchup didn't ever happen when LeBron was on the Cavs. But when he went to the Heat and they were kind of like a shoo-in to get to the finals, people were like, okay, now we'll get the Kobe-LeBron matchup. The 2010 Christmas Day game, LeBron's first year with the Heat, they made that the Christmas Day game, but Lakers Heat, because they kind of everyone thought, okay, this will be the finals matchup. We'll get a preview of it. It'll be prime time, and then the Lakers stunningly lost to the Mavericks in the second round of the playoffs that year, so we didn't get to see it. The next year, the Lakers again lost in the second round to the Thunder, so we didn't get to see the finals matchup. And then the next year, the Lakers retooled, brought in Steve Nash and Dwight Howard, and they had like a big five between Nash, Kobe, Artest, Pau Gasol, and Dwight Howard. But we again didn't get to see it because Kobe went down injured late in the season. The team just didn't gel at all whatsoever. Nash was out for like 50 plus games. So the Lakers went quietly in the playoffs in the first round. And Nash was well past his prime at this point. And Dwight Howard had injury issues this year. Really, the only two that were healthy throughout the whole season were Gasol and Artest. And Gasol was being used really weirdly by Mike D'Antoni during this season, so it never really worked out either. But overall, it would have been really cool to see the matchups. Like, probably you would have had, let's see here, Pau Gasol versus Chris Bosh. Probably Ron Artest going up against Ray Allen, Kobe going up against LeBron, and then if it would have been 2013, you probably would have had like Steve Nash going up against Dwayne Wade. If it would have been earlier than that, it would have been Derek Fisher. Still, it would have been some really cool matchups. You would have had Kobe, and probably the marquee ones would be like Kobe and LeBron and Bosh and Pau Gasol going against each other. That being said, I hope you guys found these interesting. I hope you found it fun. I hope that you guys comment below if you have some additional matchups that you would have loved to see that I didn't list on here. And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.